This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Armis. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, transformation tricks to smooth the way for your agency. A bigger cyber attack surface doesn't have to mean more cyber risk, and the CIA's three-pronged approach to AI. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. 3 federal agencies are the latest recipients of money from the Technology Modernization Fund to upgrade systems and applications. The awards to the Federal Election Commission, the Bureau of Indian Affairs at Interior, and the Energy Department add up to about $31 million. Dave Hinchman is Director of Information Technology and Cybersecurity at the Government Accountability Office. Dave, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Are there common threads that you have seen in the many transformation efforts that you've overseen at GAO among the ones that succeed and the ones that don't do as well?
I think there are 2 common threads, which are intentionality and mindfulness about what these agencies set out to do. It can't be just transformation for transformation's sake. You need to really have a deep understanding of what it is you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to do it, making sure you're partnering with the right organization, as well as thinking through the things that come with transformation now, such as cybersecurity, improvements in citizen services, what it means to provide connected government. And I think that really the agencies and the organizations that go through the thought exercise of really thinking that through are the ones who tend to come out better at the end.
I note the 2 things that you go to first don't really have a lot to do with the technology itself. They have to do with the project management. They have to do with the change management. What does that mean, do you think?
You're right. It's the culture that's created. Are you setting up a culture that wants to succeed? Or again, as I mentioned, are you doing change for change's sake? I think there's a lot of work that goes into these efforts. People need to think differently about how they do business, what it means for their internal processes. And so it's very much a people change that has to happen from the get-go.
2 of the pieces there that you talked about, I think, are really important too. You talked about cyber and CX. 5 years ago, I don't think if we had this conversation, the customer experience piece of it would have mattered much to people. What has that change meant for the way that agencies do these transformations, and what has it meant for the outcomes that they're getting as you look at them?
So the CX part really is a hugely important part of government transformation right now. As we learned in the pandemic, there are a lot of things that we can put online that we didn't before, which gives greater access for people who want forms, who want to generate a process, who want to create a transaction with the government. And so there's a really important part of also thinking through what you're doing with that and what does it mean to interact with citizens in this new sort of mindset, because you're now creating these electronic transactions which have a security thread, as you mentioned. Cybersecurity is a huge part of this, but also making sure that you really understood not only how your relationship with citizens are changing, but also what that change means internal to your organization.
So that relationship change also then implies the way that the agency provides the service can and probably should change in the course of these transformations. Are you seeing agencies taking advantage of that opportunity to think about their business processes, the steps that one takes, either they take or that the citizen takes, that underpin those transactions?
Absolutely, and I think that's a huge part of that business re-engineering. It's not that you have something that takes 5 steps to conduct a transaction. Maybe it takes more in this new media, but have you really thought through what those new steps are to make sure that they're efficient, that they're getting your desired results and ultimately improving the CX experience?
Have you seen particular examples of agencies that are doing it well, that are on the right track, even if they haven't completed what they set out to do?
I think the IRS is a good example of an organization going through a major transformation. The money that they receive through the Inflation Reduction Act is generational in the amount it was, and the money that they're putting towards their business systems modernization, as well as improving things like customer experience, creating more customer service reps, creating better systems on the back end so that a single rep can access a lot more information. And just the amount of queue times that they've been able to reduce from what happened during the pandemic when they really were struggling with resources, I think has made a huge difference.
I wonder how important you think the terminology is here. When Suzette Kent was the federal CIO, she made it a deliberate point to tell people, We're not going to use the term modernization anymore. We're going to talk about these as transformations, and the reason that she gave was modernization implies we fix stuff, we put new things in place, and then we're finished for a while. And that's not the way, in her view, that the world of technology worked in 2021, 2022 when she was in office. Claire Martirana has continued that idea as the federal CIO. Has that made a difference in the way that organizations and government think about what they're doing in these areas?
I think it has. I mean, to your point, it's not just modernization. We're not putting in a new server that replaces the older model. It's a server with different capabilities that performs different functions. And you're really changing with this new updated technology you're bringing in, updated services. You're bringing about a new way of delivering on government's mission, whether it's citizen-oriented, whether it's internally focused. So it really is, it's transformative rather than just modernizing what already exists.
How are agencies doing, in your view, at thinking about that then, that this is a process that will be ongoing, not just from the technology perspective, but thinking about it from a cyber perspective? The threat landscape changes every day. Thinking about it from a budget perspective, we're going to have to do these kinds of efforts year after year after year and so on.
Well, you know, a couple of moments ago, you gave the 4 to 5 year horizon in the past. And I think in the past 4 to 5 years, all of the things that you just mentioned have all changed dramatically. Cyber is no longer an afterpart, something you slap on an existing system. It's an fundamental understanding that we have to build cyber in from day one. It has to be there from the get-go because the threats are that complex and the threats are that pervasive. And so I think that's created a very different mindset, both from the internal processes that you're trying to change as well as the monetary side. You need to find money to be able to do this. You need to line up the executive sponsors within your organization that are going to champion this cause and make sure that you can see it through to the end, and that what you're ultimately walking away with is what you intended from day one.
Does it matter more who those champions are, what jobs they hold, or does it matter more just that they exist and there's somebody within the organization saying to someone higher up in the organization, the CIO is not the only person that thinks this is important?
It does matter, and we call it executive sponsorship. You want someone at the C level who is really going to be out there champion. And again, to go back to IRS, I think Commissioner Werfel takes the IT modernization going on at IRS very seriously. He talked a lot about it at his confirmation hearings. He's also spoken about it in other public venues. And I think he really understands the importance of delivering on what IRS is getting very close to providing in terms of updating and transforming how they manage our tax returns.
We have less than a minute left, Dave. How does one gauge in an environment where the transformation will be continuous and there isn't an end state, how one is doing on this journey?
Performance metrics. That's another part of setting out from the day one. You have to know whether you're delivering on plan, whether you're delivering on results. And I think that's something the federal government can improve on overall. That's something we've found historically. But we do see more and more organizations starting to look at creating those benchmarks so that they do have discrete points of performance to point to and say, yes, we're doing good here, we need to improve here.
Dave Hinchman, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Francis.
You can find links to some of Dave's work and read more about modernization in government on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, a bigger cyber attack surface doesn't have to mean more cyber risk. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Here's Lindsay Gillespie, Senior Solutions Leader at Databricks from the ATO and Cloud Security Summit, presented by Carahsoft.
A lot of changes coming down the pipeline in the next 5 years. I see at the core of all of it being AI, whether or not your team's using it directly, or if you're supporting other teams that are using it, no matter how you're procuring it, if you're generating some kind of model yourself, or if you're buying some kind of software solution. No matter what, AI is going to have an impact in the cloud security for your organization. Mm-hmm.
The Navy needs 100,000 people to build the next generation of submarines. Securing the depths, addressing workforce challenges in the submarine industrial base, dives into the critical issues behind getting new Columbia and Virginia-class submarines in the water. Top experts from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the Navy, and EY will tell you what they need and what's working to build the sub-workforce of the future. Securing the Depths, presented by EY, debuts Tuesday night, September 3rd at 8:30 p.m. on WJLA 24/7 News, or watch online at fedgovtoday.com. Welcome back. The next generation of the Defense Department's Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification is on the street. One of the goals the department has said it has for CMMC is to shrink the attack surface for cyber adversaries. Tom Goretti is Vice President of External and Government Affairs at ARMIS. Tom, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. Connect for me concept that you and I talked about a moment ago called situational awareness with the work that agencies are doing to try to reduce or protect their attack surfaces.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Francis. When you mention the attack surface, the dynamic and ever-growing attack surface that continues to challenge agencies and organizations includes things that it didn't include 5 or 10 years ago. IoT devices, OT devices, medical IoT devices, and now, of course, throw the cloud in there. So it's really important to understand not only what exists within your environment, but what's happening with all of those assets that are within your environment. What are the dependencies between those assets? Where do your vulnerabilities lie? As much information as you can gather and understand about this dynamic and growing environment, the better position you're in to really manage that attack surface and manage vulnerabilities that you may have.
Is it realistic for agencies to think that they can shrink their attack surfaces, or are the factors that are causing them to grow kind of beyond the control of the agencies if they want to leverage the technologies that you just described?
Yeah, so I think it's really all about having the right framework in place. If you have a framework in place where you know how to identify the dynamic growth of that attack surface, you really are managing it, and you are shrinking your scope of focus because you have measurables and you have a way of understanding if that's growing, where it's growing, where anomalies may be, and where vulnerabilities may lie.
That's one of the areas that a lot of CISOs and CIOs that I talk to find a lot of potential when they think about artificial intelligence. Is that something that you see also?
Absolutely. When you look at the amount of data that is generated through alerts and tracking assets that are out there, we're talking about billions and billions of pieces of information. No human can manually sort through that. So we hear a lot about the fears and the worries of AI. AI is being used today for good and can be used for good in the cybersecurity realm. If a machine learning and AI model can sort through information quickly and bring relevant and actionable information to security teams, the end result becomes a more efficient workflow and more effective security teams.
What do AI solutions do, though, that standard cyber automation tools didn't do?
Well, I think if you want to call them standard tools in the past, those standard tools now are incorporating AI technologies. So the complexities and the frequency by which attacks are coming today can be handled with these new models that are being developed in the AI space.
To address the things that we're talking about here, you've written about something called a whole-of-nation approach. What do you mean by that term, and who does what in that approach?
Sure. I think when we look at bad actors and nation states are certainly taking a whole-of-nation approach in the way they are attacking the U.S. I think the more collaboration that we see between federal agencies, the public and private sector, between states and local governments, the more best of breed that's coming to the table from each of those environments, the more dynamic we can be, the more we can stay ahead of the adversary and do some predictive analysis that can put organizations and agencies in a better position to handle this new attack surface.
Where do you see those solutions coming from now? You talk about a lot of levels of government, and there's the industry government dynamic at all of those levels as well. Where do you see the solutions and the success coming from?
Yeah, so if you look at the federal government, CISA has their JCDC program. You look at NIST. NIST has several collaborative programs. We're seeing collaboration in the last maybe 3 to 5 years that we haven't seen in the past. And that is bringing new thought forward. Now when we're seeing procurements go out there, information is being gathered from the private sector to make sure that agencies and the federal government is leading and not chasing. And that's an important part of this whole of nation, I even say whole of society approach to attacking this problem.
We have about 30 seconds left, Tom.
Sure.
How does one measure success? Is it just we don't get attacked, or are there other factors that people should be tracking to make sure that they're doing the right things?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think what's really important is to first ask the question, are we relying on a legacy model with legacy contracts and legacy technology, or are we looking at a new way of protecting our environments? It all starts there, and then to have a holistic approach to cybersecurity and embed it in programs early on, so it's not just a bolt-on solution.
Tom, it's great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having
your time
me, Francis.
today. You can read more about cybersecurity in the federal government on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the CIA's three-pronged approach to AI. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Here's Stephen Pepino, Principal Cybersecurity Architect at Salesforce from the ATO and Cloud Security Summit presented by Carasoft.
I think about it as I do most things from a people, process, and technology perspective. So from a people perspective, and this is nothing new, we have a significant skill gap and pay gap that goes hand in hand with that. From a skills perspective, and this isn't limited to just the government, this is across the nation, but we have a limited cyber workforce. And so that's a real challenge that we face. But I think what's more important, well, just as important, is that cyber workforce, getting them interested in working with the government, right? And so how do we attract these very highly talented folks to work for the government? And we have to start looking at the pay limitations. I know plenty of very talented cybersecurity folks who have a ton of experience, but they often find that when they're interested in the government, there are limitations, like they're required to have some specific certification. They don't have that certification. They're offered to come in at a lower pay level, and that causes a problem.
Welcome back. The Central Intelligence Agency's new AI strategy features 3 pillars. One of the goals of the strategy is to help the agency stay ahead of adversaries who are using AI tools too. Lakshmi Raman is Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer at the CIA. Welcome. It's great to have you on the program. Before we go through the strategy, I'll ask you the same question I asked Leslie about Fulcrum. How did you put this together, and who all was involved in putting your strategy together?
Sure. So thank you for having me. When we put together the AI strategy, it's with the understanding that we had been doing data science and AI at the CIA for a very, very long time. So it was incredibly important that we took a whole of agency approach with respect to pulling together the strategy. So we really coalesced with all of the mission centers and all of the directorates in order to coordinate, develop, and advance the CIA's AI strategy.
All right, pillar 1 is AI as an intelligence topic. I like the phrasing there. What is behind that phrasing?
So our job is really to inform the policymakers all about everything that has global impact. So AI, with, as you can imagine, all of the global impact that's ongoing, is something that we felt needed to be tracked and collected on and analyzed in and of itself. It's incredibly important that we were thinking about our adversaries' plans, use, and intentions with respect to this, so we can really help understand how it's going to address our national security mission.
Mm-hmm. And so you're thinking about it from not just a position of what you're doing, but what everybody else might be doing, both, I imagine, allies and adversaries. Is that a fair read on my part?
Absolutely. In addition to that, we're also incredibly interested in how we are going to utilize it ourselves, right? So that takes us into our second pillar of the AI strategy, right? How are we leveraging AI to be able to augment our own human judgment, to be able to automate our own workflows and move a little bit faster, our low-level cognitive tasks. And really, when we think of that, we're thinking about how do we democratize access to the models for our data scientists and our developers, and how do we incorporate these technologies into the workflows of our officers. So we really want it to where it's really making a day in the life for them much easier. In addition to those kind of pointy edge of the spear capabilities, we're also thinking about those AI adjacent activities that need to come along when we are trying to augment AI as a mission enabler. How are we upskilling, recruiting, retaining our workforce? How are we ensuring we have the right technological foundations in place to enable AI at scale? How are we making sure we do everything in a responsible and ethical manner? And then finally, how are we working with our partners across the IC, across the USG, as well as our academic and industry partners? So all of that really falls under our second pillar of the AI strategy.
You mentioned integrating this into the workflows of your personnel. What did you learn from that process as you've started to implement this strategy, and what do you expect, what are you going to track at least as far as integrating it into their workflows moving forward?
So the one thing that is incredibly important is collaboration. The collaboration between our subject matter experts, which is in this case our AI practitioners, our data scientists, as well as our mission and business partners, because really when we're talking about augmenting human judgment and automating low-level cognitive tasks, it's our business that's going to help us understand what those are. And then our practitioners and our data scientists are the ones who are actually going to be able to implement those solutions. So that collaboration is incredibly important. I think when we start talking about tracking, we're really talking about governance, right? We're starting to talk about our third pillar of this strategy. And when we're talking about governance, we're really talking about a whole of agency approach to thinking about what are the most important things we're going to be doing, what are the gaps and duplications we need to be thinking about so that we can fill in those or deduplicate efforts. What are we tracking and progressing on and monitoring so that we can inform our senior leadership as well as our oversight mechanisms. Our governance pillar also includes the work we do on risk, right? Because obviously we need to do our best to mitigate risk with respect to AI. And it also includes all of the recent work that's happened with respect to the President's executive order. And luckily, we have an IC ethics framework that we've been able to draw upon within the intelligence community that we can then help to drive these activities within the agency.
It strikes me that data underpins in some way or another each one of these three pillars. What did you learn about your data as far as you started to work on implementing this plan, about its condition or its curation or the way you're storing it, any of that?
Right, so I have a very close partnership with our Chief Data Officer at the CIA. We probably talk every day. And it's really about working with them to ensure, as you said, the data is conditioned and curated and made available in bulk so that we can leverage it to drive our AI solutions.
What is I've seen you speak a number of times, talk about public-private partnerships. What's the context for that in an artificial intelligence environment in an organization like CIA?
Oh my goodness, like public-private partnership is essential to the work we do at the CIA. Number one is, we have a very, very talented workforce at the CIA, and especially our data scientists are so heavily in demand. And we are in a space where the demand far exceeds the supply. So we are working very heavily, and they're very gainfully employed where we work. But we need to lean on our private industry to bring us solutions and capabilities that can help us also meet our national security mission. With respect to AI, particularly generative AI, private industry is also leading the way. They're leading and innovating in that space. So working with them on generative AI services and solutions, as well as with non-traditional partners who can provide us those more niche solutions to drive our national security mission, is incredibly important.
How do you go about finding those niche technologies that will help you get the edge that you've talked about seeking?
We've done a number of things. Number one, we leverage the common kind of FAR mechanisms you might imagine, right? Competitions, sole source competitions, sole source mechanisms, but also we're looking at non-traditional approaches as well to help us explore.
As you explore those, What are the things that make a technology potentially appealing to you? Is it just it does something that we don't have access to now, or is it more complicated, more complex than that?
I think I think that's one aspect, right? Are there things that that industry is leading on that we don't have the ability to do? Sometimes it's the opposite, right? Sometimes it's what are they doing that they can do on behalf of everybody that we can then leverage, and we can use our in-house CIA data scientists to be able to develop the exquisite classified solutions that we need them to.
We talked at the beginning of the conversation about the need to stay ahead of adversaries. How does one gauge how one is doing, or how does an organization gauge how you're doing at doing that in an area like this?
So, that's a lot of our bread and butter, right, within the Directorate of Analysis, is they're really doing a lot of work to analyze, understand what the threat looks like with respect to our adversaries' plans, use, and intentions with AI. And we're seeing, a lot of progress in that space since we've made that a strategic pillar. A
little bit less than a minute left. How do you judge success of the deployment execution of this strategy?
So we are collecting a number of metrics, both quantitative and qualitative vignettes, to help us address how mature we are as an agency against our 3 strategic pillars, not in a relative way, but in an absolute way, to understand, how our maturity looks. We are also thinking about what return on investment looks like for our investments. So we are doing a number of data-driven. We're doing a bit of data-driven work to do that, but also collecting vignettes where we can really understand where the mission impact has been.
Do you have a time frame that you think will be a reasonable amount of time to be able to look at those metrics and say, okay, we've come this far? If so, what does that look like?
We're doing that currently. We're doing that on an ongoing basis.
Thank you very much for joining me. It's great to have you on the program today.
Thank you very much.
You can read more about AI at CIA on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in a moment. The Navy needs 100,000 people to build the next generation of submarines. Securing the Depths, addressing workforce challenges in the submarine industrial base, dives into the critical issues behind getting new Columbia and Virginia-class submarines in the water. Top experts from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the Navy, and EY will tell you what they need and what's working to build the sub-workforce of the future. Securing the Depths, presented by EY, debuts Tuesday night, September 3rd at 8:30 p.m. on WJLA 24/7 News, or watch online at fedgovtoday.com. Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, more than 100 federal government speakers from more than 24 agencies will speak at the 15th annual Billington Cybersecurity Summit. It's coming to the Reagan Building September 3rd through 6th. The speaker list includes the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown, the National Cyber Coordinator, Harry Coker, the commander of U.S. Cyber Command, General Timothy Hawk, the federal CIO, Claire Martirana, and a lot more. It's free for federal employees. You can read more about it and register at fedgovtoday.com/events. FedGov Today TV is back next Sunday morning at 10:30. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching and have a great week.